the Reserve Bank of India that is now examining the issue of pesky telemarketing calls. The RBI hinted that it's the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India that should be looking into the matter. However, they also said, the Deputy Governor of RBI also said that they will be looking at pesky calls. Why the sudden interest? This comes after the issue of consumer concerns received wide attention on social media when recently Bajaj FinServ MD Sanjiv Bajaj said that the general public will get an option on the website to be forgotten, and once they enter their number, they would not be disturbed again. But Bajaj also added that customers who opt out should not come back for loans. And that, of course, is the big story that we're tracking here of pesky calls, telemarketing calls. I want to come to you first, Krishna, who continues to be with me in the studio. Krishna, you know, just yesterday, day before yesterday, we were discussing the need for TRAI, the telecom regulator, to crack down on pesky calls because it is a constant problem. And TRAI is going after telecom service providers. It is telling them to come up with a central registry where a consumer like you and me can register our consent.
Right, that was the Digital Consent Acquisition Facility, or the DCA facility that the Telecom Department of India, telecom regulator, is directing the telecom operators to set up. The thing is that when it was set up, remember we had the discussion about in phase 1 of this entire digital consent acquisition game plan, it is only thrown open to the consumers first to see whether they are willing to give the consent on certain calls or not. And it's not even up to the, this process doesn't give any leeway to the products that are being telemarketed or the telecom operators. So in that sense, it's all consumer centric. But this reaction from a private player like this is very interesting because then it throws up the question, right, if you get too many calls, then that's problematic. If you have no idea what the offers are around on then products that you want to buy, how are you, going to make that decision to go for that product? You could be like sitting in vacuum, saying no to all those calls and absolutely have no idea that like you need a product, you need it at a good price, and maybe if you're one of those promotional offers for which you get phone calls for, that's the one you're going to get. So I'm just being the devil's advocate to the whole thing over here, but the fact of the matter is that this surprises me. The fact that the private player will turn around and say, oh yeah, you want to opt out? Bye-bye. Thank you very much. If you want to opt out, then we're not going to tell you anything about any of the calls. And in that sense, if other private players were to start take after this kind of a reaction, that'll be interesting to see. But for now, I'm just surprised with this initial sharp reaction coming in from Bajaj Finance. Okay, and sharp reaction to that video bite that we saw being pushed out on one of the social media handles of a prominent, media channel. I want to quickly bring in Mr. I think we've been joined by a guest. Mr. Mohit Gang is joining us. He's the co-founder, CEO of Moneyfront. Sir, appreciate you taking time out. I want to quickly understand from you the entire system that has been floated around pesky calls. We understand that TRAI is already looking into the matter. It has asked telecom regulator, has asked in fact all existing players to make sure there is a concerted effort from all of them to not disturb customers. What's the progress made so far?
Thank you very much. Look, I think though there are steps in the right direction, but on the ground, the reality is quite different. To be very honest, I think these calls are being done from circuitous numbers. These are being done using some international lines and routed through many other middle layer telephone operators. It's very difficult for TRAI or anyone else to trace these, though there are DLT rules and all, but I don't think so in spirit it gets followed to that extent, right? So my sense is on the ground, it's a very different scenario. I think customers do have a right to opt for a DND and those kind of things, but even then, the amount of pesky calls have just been going up. And to my mind, honestly, I think if corporates are taking a step in that direction to remove the clutter by a little, I think honestly, it's a good thing for the overall ecosystem. Because finally, look, I don't know as to how many of us really end up listening to the full call and finally buying a product. We always buy a product by its own merit or by our own research, not just because someone has called us or something like that. But I think there needs to be a serious effort on the ground. There is still a lack of credible reduction in this thing.
There is still a lack of credible detection, but I think let me quickly bring in Krishna's point of view here, and which is also very interesting, and that is, if you are not to be bothered by these calls, and I understand majority of us do not even listen to what a pesky call has to offer to us beyond perhaps 30 seconds, because then we identify the call as a pesky call and we disconnect immediately. But if we are not to get these calls at all, then we won't be aware of a lot of offers that are doled out to us as customers. And therefore, what Mr. Bajaj said in that statement, that fine, you don't want to hear us, it's okay, you can choose not to hear us, but then how will you come to us for loan, or do not come back to us for loan? I mean, it could have been worded better, but essentially saying that you will not be able to know what we have to offer you. How will you know where to come to?
Look, honestly, I think it's kind of a little lame from where I come from. Honestly, I think there are so many digital channels today. If I open up my mobile phone, Google will throw me 20 different ads. My Instagram feed or my Twitter timeline will show me multiple different ads of different things. Whatever products I'm using, whenever I visit their websites, there are different ads flashing on it. So there's too much of information. There's an information overload, right? It's not that information is the problem in today's day and age. So I don't need a telecaller to tell me that there is an XYZ property which has come up or which is there. There are so many hoardings across the city, and if I'm a genuine residential buyer, I will definitely go out and figure it out from newspapers or any other medium channels and so on. If I'm a genuine insurance buyer, which is the most irritant of all the calls, basically, then I will definitely look out for one and I'll assess the product on its merit. I don't need a telecaller to tell me that 10 times in a day and 30 times over a month that there is a product which is available. So I think that's the problem. It's being overdone.
Okay. Do you agree with that assessment, that it's being overdone? I think there is some merit to the argument that you do not need to call me. If I want to avail a certain facility, I will go and look for you. And let me say where I'm coming from. Let me explain quickly. If I'm looking for a home to rent, I can go on one of these websites and actually look for a number, call them up, get all the information. Rarely would you find someone getting advice unsolicited from a phone call, and that actually using that advice in your personal life. So the argument that telemarketing is essential, it's important, it's critical to the function of not just the companies who are making these calls, but also in consumers' interest, falls short somewhere, Krishna.
Definitely. As I said, when I even made that argument, that I was being the devil's advocate for the sake of it. Fact of the matter is that you really don't need to call somebody and tell them what is available. We have something called as the World Wide Web or the internet these days that's there on our phones all the time at just the tap, or not even a tap, just look at it, it opens. So why would you need somebody calling you and telling you definitely that? So in that sense, that's the reason why, how come Mr. Sanjiv Bajaj didn't think of it? While responding to something like this, that when somebody will be asking that question, saying that you really don't need somebody to make a phone call, and if somebody doesn't want to make a phone call, doesn't mean that you're going to be nasty to a potential customer. My other concern, actually, I would ask our guest is that kind of a remark, what does it mean for the consumers of, customers of Bajaj Finance? What does it tell them of the kind of company that they're associating themselves with or are dealing with?
Right, and not just Bajaj Finance, but in general, all the finance NBFCs, the finance companies. We're not trying to single out any particular company, but essentially the idea that if you don't want us to call you, we'll not give you a loan. How do you place that statement, Mr. Gang?
Look, honestly, I think Bajaj Finance has been generating almost 50% of his loan business through this telecalling. So I understand the vantage point from which Mr. Bajaj has been coming from, and he has promised that he'll reduce that to below 10% in terms of proportion of business which is getting generated from telecalls. But again, that argument, I find it quite void, that a person can't figure out which is the best opportunity available and which are the best products suited for me. Today, in this day and age, I think information overload is the problem. Everyone is trying to reduce it. And if I'm a genuine buyer, if I'm a genuine buyer of a home loan or insurance product or a residential property itself, I will definitely go on the internet, search it out, assess all the players. There are multiple platforms which give me an assessment of all the properties, all the insurance providers, all the loan providers, the rate of interest and everything. Yes, at times these calls can actually come when you are really thinking in the mind, and at that point in time, it can spur you to, in that moment, to go. My whole objection is not that you should not be calling. You can call to a limited extent. When a person says, I'm not interested and don't call me, then I think that number should be struck off completely, which is what is not happening currently.
Okay.
I
And
daily get the
you know,
same calls again.
that reminds me to ask you the most pertinent question. What is stopping TRAI to take definitive action? There are deadlines on deadlines that are given to various telecom operators. May 1st was the initial deadline to get rid of the unsolicited calls, messages, texts. Now we know of a central registry, which Krishna alluded to, would also be known as a digital consent acquisition, essentially a register where consent would be noted every week, every month. There seems to be a new initiative just to get rid of pesky calls. What are the hindrances? Where are the problems?
That's to me.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So look, I think companies want it, and companies want it badly. They have huge call centers, which are the business model is completely based on it, and finding out roundabout ways of negotiating with the try compliances or compliances of various governing bodies or DOT or even DLT for that matter is fairly easy. Yesterday night, I got a message from a foreign number, from a completely foreign number, some unknown code, which was offering me to subscribe to some YouTube channels. Look, these kind of messages, these kind of calls come from some numbers which you will not even, which you will not be able to even trace it out,
Yeah, but
right?
this is
So
not even
I think the whole problem
telemarketing.
is,
That would be a spam call, Mr. Gang, or a spam message. Would you even categorize it as telemarketing call or message?
look, most of these telemarketing calls are also spams, basically, right? So some of these, in the guise of telemarketing, the lot of spam has also increased. And Mr. Bajaj himself addressed that point while he was answering that question in the press conference. He said that yes, we've figured out a huge racket we've busted in Mumbai where people were calling on behalf of Bajaj Finance, and that was not genuinely Bajaj Finance. So that's another problem which is emanating from this entire call center business. My submission is fairly simple out here. There are many roundabout ways, and some hard policies will have to be built in. Customers should genuinely have an option to opt out of these things, and once opt out, the company should maintain a register that no calls will be henceforth given to those customers. I think that is not being followed into a spirit, and TRAI will have to formulate guidelines and push companies to make sure that the register is being maintained very honestly and sincerely.
Okay, and that is the idea, to maintain a register of consent. And how is it going to work out, Krishna? Because I think we touched upon it, but for the benefit of our viewers,
Right.
who are tuning in right now to listen to this conversation, what is the idea behind the register? How frequently will I have to give consent? What changes?
So first of all, there's a 2-month deadline, first of all, for the completion of this digital consent acquisition facility, which is a digital platform that's going to be built. And that platform will essentially seek, maintain, and revoke consent. So those 3 words are operative. First of all, it will seek consent. It will maintain consent, which means that whenever, if you feel like revoking at a particular stage, you should be free to revoke consent. It's not like once given is done for life. So that's the question that you're asking. How do you make sure that I am consenting to these things at a regular basis? Because what I say yes to today, 3 months down the line, I might not want to. So the digital content acquisition facility, it's being directed to seek, maintain, and revoke consent based on customer preferences, and it's being thrown open in phase 1 only to people. There will be a limited set of numbers that will be given to them, where you tick mark and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, or no, 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 and then you start with 0, and then maybe 3 months down, and you're like, what? Actually, only those what do you call it, holiday phone calls, or only that about poker, if you're interested in poker.
Okay.
You never know these things. But the fact of the matter is that consent is not something that's set in stone once given.
Right. So you can
has to
revoke
be,
it.
Yes.
You can give consent, but you can also revoke consent. There is
Yes.
going to be a provision in place for you to
How
revoke
it's going
as
to play
and
out
when
is,
you want.
yes, and how it's going to play out, how is it the final, how is it going to look like? Well, we'll know in 2 months' time.
Okay, we'll know in 2 months' time. That, of course, is the hope, Mr. Gang, because there have been measures on measure, as I pointed out. 1st of May was the deadline. We are already 9th of June today. Not much has happened. We are still getting about 2 to 3 calls, pesky calls in general a day. I'm talking about an average person. You could be getting more or less, depending on where you are, how much you're earning, and your profile, because an entire telemarketing system operates out of profiling. Isn't that true? Isn't that correct?
Oh, totally, totally. I think there are a lot of data selling centers or shops which you can find here and there. A plethora of those who will sell what kind of data you want. Specifically, if you want a data of doctors from XYZ city, or you want a data of orthopedicians who earn so and so amount across the country, you will get any kind of refined data available today at a minor cost, right? I think the guidelines also have to be formed around companies, basically where a lot of this thing happens through group companies also. Just taking a
Okay.
case in point, if a particular company, let's say Bajaj Finance for that matter, enters the AMC business, they have a lot of group companies where calling is already happening, right? So there should be some confidentiality clause, and I think SEBI already imposes it on NBFCs that no data can be shared uh, through your group companies or something like that. So I think those have to be a little more rigorously implemented. And there has to be some audit or
Right.
some scrutiny that the data hasn't leaked from one company to another company and the calling has been done to a customer of some other group company.
Absolutely. And the leakage in data, that of course is another story for another day. We continue to track that story. It's important because it talks about data privacy, how easily your data is accessible, and to who all and what all data. Your personal data, your information, your address, your name, your age, how much you earn, all of that easily available, used by telemarketing companies to sell you a product that you don't need. This of course is a chain here that needs to be broken, and there has to be more concerted attempt by TRAI, RBI, all the regulators, all the authorities to ensure your data as citizens of this country is protected. We will come back with more on that story, but that's all we have in this bulletin. Thanks very much for watching.